Could you state your full name for us, the name that you were born with?
MosheBaran,
And when and where were you born?
December 1, 1920, in Gorodok, then Poland, now Belarus.
And how old are you right now?
How old am I right now? I'm 94 and a half.
I like that half, that's important. Moshe, what is your religious identity?
Jewish.
And can you briefly tell us what your role was during World War II?
During World War II, right? World War started in September 1, 1939. The Germans attacked Poland from the west, and they stopped in the middle. There was a river Bug, and there was a reason for it, because they had a non-aggression agreement with the Soviet Union. Officially. Secretly, they had an agreement to divide Poland. So this is why they stopped there where they stopped. 17 days later, the Soviets invaded the part of Poland where I was born. And about 18 months later, in June 1941, the Germans attacked the Soviet Union, and within a few days they were in my little town.
Now, where were you fighting with the partisans? In what parts of? That was in Poland, correct?
It was Belarus already. Poland didn't exist anymore.
Right.
Formerly Poland, formerly.
Okay.
Now it was Belarus.
And about how long did you spend in the forest?
About 18 months.
Can you tell us one of the, I don't know if you would call it a mission or some kind of event that you took part in, you know, something against the Germans while you were with the partisans?
First, I want to tell you something which is not part of the resistance, but the resistance helped me save part of my family. By joining them, I got connections to enter the ghetto and brought up my brother and sister one time. That had some weapons that were stolen from the Germans and had it hidden in the ghetto. So this farmer brought out the weapons. At the third time, it was March 17, 1943, my mother came out. 2 days later, the ghetto was destroyed. And that was my father and sister, including all my relatives, and about 6,000 or 7,000 other Jews. Now, as far as the partisans, I participated in many activities, like ambushes and attacks on small garrisons. For a while, I had a mission to retrieve parachuted weapons from the Russian army, which meant that myself and a few other people had to find a clearance in the forest and set up. They used to set up by radio signals where to drop it, so they would have fires, let's say, a triangle in format, whatever was arranged by radio. And after the drops, we would pick it up and bring it to the place where we were located, the camp, the partisan camp.
Moshe, when and how did you meet your spouse?
I met Malka in 1946. In Austria, the town of Linz, there was a former Austrian army barracks, and she was visiting somebody in barrack number 13, and so was I. I found a friend from before the war that I knew that was there, and we met there, and we introduced each other, and that was it.
Would you mind telling us just a little bit about your wife's story? Because I know you were both involved.
About my wife.
Yeah.
She was born in the Polish town of Częstochowa, which is at the western part of Poland, close to the German border. And when the Germans occupied the town, about a short time later, they began to force some of the Jewish population to do some forced labor somewhere, and her father and brother once went to work and never came back. She was, by looking at her, she was physically able to work, and because they selected her among those who will be alive. Her mother was separated and died in I think in Majdanek. I'm not sure. And she spent in the same town about 3.5 years in this forced labor camp. Their work was cleaning the spent shells, artillery shells against airplanes, to prepare them for reuse. But something happened there which is was very rare in those camps. One night I hear the voice of a baby crying. And there was no baby supposed to be there. So then they watched the woman, one of the inmates, walking to the place where the baby was crying, picked up the baby and took it to wherever she was. It turned out that this woman's husband, I think, was a Jewish policeman in the ghetto, and he was able to smuggle in the baby into the barracks, and from there on the baby became the object of making sure that he is not being discovered. So he would stay hidden all the time, particularly when the German supervisors would come in. Almost 3.5 years. And sometime in 1944, they had a roll call every morning, and they were outside, all the women outside, and the commander of this camp reviewed them, counted them, whatever, and then he turned around, which he normally didn't do, and went back to the barracks, saying that I want to inspect the barracks, something which he never did before. And when he came out with David. The boy already was about 3.5, 4 years old, or 5 years old. And then something again which they surprised them. They said to David, "Would you like to take a ride with me on a bicycle?" So, of course. So David got on the bicycle on the back, and they thought this would be the end of it. A while later, he came back with David and left him there. And they haven't seen the commander anymore, because the Russian army was already approaching the town or the area. And about, I think, the same day, people came running to say, There's no guards anymore. There's the camp is open, and the Russian, they could hear the exchange of artillery or tanks, and the Russians arrived close to the city. So they were free, and they walked out. My wife was holding David by the hand, and went to their city, which was partially destroyed. So she recalls she and two friends went into hide because there was still a battle going on. They went into a basement to hide, and she says for the first time they cried. It says in the camp itself, there was crying was sort of. People didn't cry. People were despaired, but not cry. And now they realized that they're left alone. The families are gone. They had the opportunity to cry, and they were free. Then there's another chapter. The Russian army needed help in their supplying the troops, cooking, baking, do whatever it is. So she and her friends were sort of mobilized by the Russians and put to work. And there she met a watchmaker from the army, and he took interest in her, and he said he would like to take her to Russia. She had a friend who was very alert. She says, I don't want to go to Russia. But they had no choice, so the company or the battalion that they moved it started moving east, and they were put on a truck and moving along with the army. It came evening, they had to go to sleep. So the soldiers found a barn with hay, straw, and got ready to go to sleep. And the girls said, the lieutenant said to them, "You go in too. It's cold. We're not going. We are not going." It took him a long time to persuade them, and he said, "On condition, we'll sleep near the door." He said, "Okay." So they placed themselves near the door, and they arranged that one of them will always be awake. They fell asleep. And at night, suddenly they felt that something fell on them. And when they woke up, it was a blanket that the lieutenant put on them so they wouldn't be cold. And whenever she told about this incident, she would really be emotional, because in that crazy world, to find people who really care, soldiers, the little girls, it's an army, it's a whole. And then they decided somehow to sleep away, and they found themselves in Vienna. There was the Rothschild Hospital, which was a former hospital, but now it was a transit for refugees who were moving from east to west. So they got to that hospital, and from there they were directed to the American zone in Austria, which included the town of Linz, which included the barracks where I met her. And this was the Malka story until then. What's important about Malka is that she emerged from this hell with a mission where you will not use the word hate. This was some of her obsession. You can't use the word hate because hate is the beginning of action, and then it's atrocities and down and forth. And she made this sure in our family didn't use it. Of course, we complied with it. And she was from her childhood loved children. So we have, what's his name? Our president of the Holocaust survivors now, Harry Snyder.
Mhm.
I met him a few years ago and I didn't discuss anything with him. And then suddenly he said to me that, you know, I was in a camp in Austria. And he mentioned the name of the camp where I was. And then he said, I have a photo of that camp, from that camp. I said, I would like to see it. So he showed me a group of children. They were very rare, but it's just about children survived somewhere, in hiding or whatever it is. And he shows me he himself with a little cap. And then there are 3 teachers standing in the back. Among them is one woman, and the woman was Malka. And I didn't know her then. This was the first winter of 45 to 46. I met her in the spring of 46.
Oh, wow.
And Malka became later she went to Israel, she graduated from a teacher seminar, she taught for 2 years. When she came back to New York for 25 years, she was the first teacher and then principal of a preschool in Forest Hills, New York. And that's how she spent her whole life as children. So her children were people, not kids. She never spoke to a child by standing and talking down to a child. She always bent down to a child's level. I can talk about Malka for another hour, but
Moshe, how many children do you
I
involve?
have 2 girls.
2 girls.
One is in Israel, Jerusalem, and one is Avi here, the head of the community day school.
And how many grandkids do you have?
6, 2 in Israel and 4 here.
Moshe, what would you say is one of your favorite things to do?
To
like
me,
today, like, yeah.
talk.
Talk.
I can't walk, but I can still talk. No, really, my favorite thing is being with people, doing things, you know, going to schools, JCC, lectures, wherever I can be with people. This is my favorite situation. I like to be with people.
I like that answer. Would you say that your experiences during World War II like held you back in your life at all? Would you say they restricted you, or
Say it again.
your experiences during World War II, would you say that they held you back as a person or in your life?
What you are asking me is to speak from a normal situation, which is before the war, to a abnormal situation and what it did to me. I really can't give you analytical situation. What I do know is that it made me feel very sensitive to the sufferings of people, you know, to the to atrocities, to the injustice, things like that. To say that I didn't care before, I can't say it, because I survived only because in many situations, some people did for me. If they didn't do it, I wouldn't be here. And I speak to my children, I tell them I can give you a whole book about ifs, but it so happened that in many situations that I found myself, I found people who made a difference between me being here or being killed like anybody else. And so I appreciate it very much, and I try to, in my own way, in dealing with people, to practice the same thing, to be of help, to be of
So while you were in the forest, did you ever come into direct contact with any Germans?
Direct contact with,
With any Germans?
not direct, no.
Not direct.
It's always at a dis. I have to take it back. It was a very strange contact. The Germans were occasionally they would mount blockades or to try to trap us and destroy us. So we were in a village, and I was walking near a house or a structure with my weapon, and I got to the corner, and towards me came a German. We looked at each other, turned around, and went the other way. But there was one German. If not for him, I wouldn't be here. When we were transferred from my home ghetto to the second town, which was a ghetto and forced labor, and we were marched every morning from 6 in the morning till 6 in the evening for work, which was laying rails for a new rail link that the Germans needed from their warehouses to the main railroad. There were guards, and they were usually they were hurting. There was cursing and hitting, and they made you feel, feel that you're nobody. That was the policy of the Germans to degrade you. But there was one German who was different. His name was Lieutenant Miller, and I can see him now, short, round. He didn't look like a soldier. So I have to back up a little bit. We knew that this was the last ghetto in the area. Once the work is finished, so will be the ghetto finished. And we also knew there was some beginning of some resistance in the area against the Germans. And we knew that if you want to be accepted the resistance, you have to come with weapons. So you're in the ghetto, how do you get weapons? Again, it's one of those situations where two of my friends from the ghetto worked in a warehouse where the German collected abandoned weapons by the Russian army. So we worked out a plan where they would take out parts, wrap it up in rags, and there was a yard with some junk, and hid it there. When this German was escorting us from work, I would ask his permission to take something from the... He said, oh, go ahead. And this is how I brought in, I don't know how many times, I didn't even know what it was. And I brought it into the ghetto, and we had it hidden in a bunker. A short time later, I met a woman who said that she knows a place in the forest where local Jews who escaped set up a camp. And she knows where it is. So now we have weapons, and we have somebody who knows how to get there. How do you get out? It's a barbed wire fence. The guards are working back and forth. Anyway, we started the routine of the guards, and we found a place near a structure where the wire fence ran into it. A few nights before, we dug underneath to have enough crawl room, but she had two children. She said the children go with her. Of course, and we couldn't go out with the weapons. We couldn't go out, the four of us. I knew the area slightly because I used to travel there with my father. So one night, it was a moonless night, we watched the guard pass by, we sneaked out underneath, and we walked. There's one road, and it's in one of those country roads. And you pass by maybe one or two villages, and in villages, dogs barking, and dogs are barking, then you might be discovered, but we made it. And we came to that place where she knew that the people were there. And I remember the following morning, I think, I walked out from the forest, I looked up to the sky, and I sort of discovered something which I forgot it existed, the sky. Because the Germans came, we didn't look at the sky. We looked around like hunted animals all the time. They're coming, there's a motorcycle, there's a truck, there's coming. That didn't exist. And yet there were birds flying, and I wish I was one of them. And then he had another problem for, I don't know how long, maybe a year. You didn't change your underwear. So they had they made a fire, they take up the underwear, you put on the smoke kills the lice, and you put it on again until the next time. Okay, now, so we are there, the weapons are in the ghetto. How do you get the weapons out? Again, fortunately, two officers walked through the area where they camp. I approach them, they were Russian officers, and I start talking to them. And I find out there were two Jewish officers from the Russian army who were sent to help organize the resistance, and teach sabotage, mining the roads and things like that. And when I told them that I have weapons, I would like to join the partisans, we just came here, we are new, give us time, we'll make contact here with the locals, we'll come back to you, and we'll see what we can do. Good enough, they came back, I don't know how long it took, and they gave me the name of a farmer, Mr. Kowalski. See him and tell him what you want to do, and he'll do it for you. So I met Mr. Kowalski, and he, being that he went to the ghetto to retrieve the weapons and contact my friends, my family from the first ghetto managed to survive that liquidation because they hid in a bunker on my uncle's property. And the morning after, they walked out and they came, and they were now with me in the other one, intact. So he went the first time and he brought out my brother and sister. Next time he brought out the weapons. And here is another story. It was arranged with the partisans that we will meet at a certain farm. The farmer will bring the weapons, the partisans will come there, and I'll be there, and they'll take me and the weapons to the partisans. When I came there, the farmer said to me, they were here yesterday. They took everything, and I said, so he made me understand that they prefer local people than Jews. Why local people? Because most of the partisans were Russian soldiers who remained behind and didn't fall into captivity and didn't manage to escape. So they attached themselves to local farmers, and they worked there for the first year. And now something must have happened at the beginning of the resistance. The Germans issued a decree that all former Russian soldiers should report to camps. Well, naturally, they are not going to the camp. They knew what to expect. So they went into the woods. And many farmers had weapons too, because the Russians dropped them when they escaped. So now I have no weapons, and I'm neither here nor there. I managed to get in touch again with those Jewish officers, and they arranged that they would accept me, but my two friends would have to bring new weapons in before they were accepted. I know that for a fact that 12 young Jews from the same ghetto left with weapons. And they came and they disappeared. I was told they came, but they disappeared. I didn't know until after the war what happened to them. After the war, I met one of the former partisans who was a company commander or something. And he was bitter because he didn't find the right job and things like that. So he told me what happened. They took the weapons from the Jewish kids and they shot them. So they never arrived. Uh, so my mother came out 2 days before the ghetto was liquidated. March 17, 1943. 2 days later, March 1943, the ghetto was liquidated. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I was there with my daughter and 2 grandchildren, and we met a man who is now called a local historian. He was 12, 13 years old at that time, and he told us what happened that day. The Germans announced the day before that everybody on that street should lower the blinds, close the windows, and not to look in the windows. Naturally, they were curious, so they saw the Germans marching the ghetto inmates. Some of them were 2 years, maybe 1 year and a half skeletons, marching them across the street were the barracks. And at the door was standing, at the end was standing a German officer with a bucket. In case anybody has any valuables, he would take it away from them. And they were shot there, loaded on trucks, driven out of little town to a structure, shoved into the structure and put on fire. Now there's a very nice monument and nice fence maintained by the locals. But here am I standing on the same railroad, not the same space. 65 years ago I was a slave laborer with my daughter and 2 grandchildren, and we're looking at a place where my father, my sister, and all the others were perished. So my mother was saved. My mother was the only mother who survived from 300 families. My town was 300 Jewish families, and she was the only one who survived. And we were the only family of 4 who survived out of 6. Okay, this is up to the spring of 1944. In the spring of '94, the Germans were retreating already from the Eastern Front, but they mounted a big blockade for the whole area because the partisans were disrupting their retreat by mining the roads and the railroads. So they tried to isolate the partisans and catch them, destroy them. So we had to leave our camps. We could only take with us weapons and a few pieces of bread, or 10 pieces of bread, and walked for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. It was swamps, up to the knees in water. And the way we would rest is the trees, the roots of the trees are always higher than the swamps. So you get on the roots, you hold the tree, and you take a nap, or you nap when you walk. We walked about maybe 7 or 8 or 9 days, and we got so close to the front line that they could hear the artillery. So our commander decided that if we could get closer in a concentration of Germans, they'll destroy us. That we will turn around and try to break out that night. And we turned around, and we got into a fight. Of course, there was no German standing there on every foot. It was not that big of a thing, but they were shooting at us, and we were shooting at them, and we broke out of the encirclement. We could see already the back there, places where they warmed their food, cans and things like that. But that night, a man who was a Dutchman, who the Germans mobilizing in Denmark or Holland to be a driver for them on the front line. He came to Minsk, the capital of Belarus, knowing that there is a resistance movement there. And obviously, he must have been a socialist or communist, I don't know. He took a truckload of young Jewish kids for the Minsk ghetto. I don't know how he made contact, but he arrived in our camp. So that night he was walking next to me. He was a tall man, had a machine gun, brave. He was killed that night, so right next to me. So we were now almost free. This was already April, May. The Russian army is getting close. sometime around June, they liberated the area, and we came out. Where do you go? My hometown didn't exist anymore because some of the able-bodied people who were selected to work for the Germans escaped during the time and joined the partisans. And in 1943, with the help of a Russian group, they came back and they burned our town from one end to the other one. I was visiting it now. There's nothing there, but before now there's a little village there with some, and there's a church where we were next to the church is standing, but one building is standing there, two-story brick building. One was, the lower floor was our synagogue, and the upper floor was our school. And there is a well, and there's a little square there. And this was the square where the Germans forced the Jews out from the ghetto, and made a selection. Now, those who were selected to able-bodied saw something which I wouldn't know, but they told me after, that one of my neighbors, Mrs. Zuckerman, and one of my teachers refused to part with their children, and they went on the trucks that took them half an hour away from their incineration. They wouldn't part with them. So, and the Germans never returned to the town. The town was freed. Now, I had the, you want me to go on? Because there's something very important. It has to do with, again, with survival not only during the war, but before the war. It has to do with Jewish literacy. When the Jews received the Ten Commandments and the Bible and later the Mishnah and the whole thing, when they were driven out by the Babylonians and the temple was destroyed and the Jews was exiled, so the leaders of the community realized that not having a place where to worship and where to sacrifice, they'll assimilate, they'll disappear. So they introduced prayers instead of sacrifice. In order to pray, you have to read. So they learned to read. And then when they were exiled from one place to the other one, their reading put them ahead of everybody else because everybody else was illiterate. For 2,000 years, where they planned, most people were illiterate until 1400. The church came to Poland, and then they began to, the priests began to, the prayers and things like that. Now, before the war, I learned some bookkeeping. My uncle had a big business, and my cousin suggested to me that I should help him, and they'll pay me, and it worked because my father's business was bad. The Russians came, and all private enterprise and everything else is gone. It's all centralized. So they came with a lot of people, but no bookkeepers. So I am a bookkeeper. The Germans came, of course, everything else is gone. The Russians came back in another town already. They need a bookkeeper. So I'm the bookkeeper. So I got a job. A short time later, and I was draft age. So my boss protected me, so they wouldn't draft me. But one day he went away to a meeting, and the local military commissar obviously didn't like a Jew sitting there in the bookkeeping. He called me in, he shaved my hair, he said, "You're in the army." This is November 1944. I'm in the army, and until January 1945, our division was shipped out to the front line, to the northern front of the Second Russian Army, to the town of Danzig in Poland. It's a port city. And at night there's a roll call again, and the officers are asking questions until they came to me. They asked me where I'm from, what did I do? I said I was a bookkeeper. Come with us. And they take me to the staff of the battalion. They introduced me to the head of the financial department. He says, you're going to work with him. I'm out of the front line. It turned out the man was a wonderful man. I know his name, I can see his face now. But he was alcoholic, which many Russian officers and soldiers. So I became the bookkeeper. So I'm sitting in the office, January 45, May 45, the war ended. So the 3 cases, my bookkeeping put me in a different situation. And this is something very, very, very important, because the literacy helped Jews to advance. It's also called for jealousy. Because landowners usually were having a good time somewhere in Paris, and they need somebody to run their business, so shipping lumber and harvest and things like that. The Jew is putting in charge of this whole thing here. The farmers don't know the landlord, they know him. So I have to tell you that because it's part of my story. After the war, we served for another year. We were sent back to Russia. In the meantime, there was an agreement between the Polish government in exile in London and the Russian government to allow former Polish citizens to go back to Poland. So all those who escaped from Western Poland to Eastern Poland began to move to the West again.
Okay, last question, Moshe, and then we'll leave you alone. What, if you could pass on one message or one lesson from your experiences, what would that be?
I write a blog. It's called Do Not Be Complacent. Language, again, go back to Malka's idea about language. There's a saying in Talmud in Hebrew, but I'll translate it in English. Language can heal and language can kill. My message simply is do not be complacent. If something is happening which is wrong, if you are complacent, you might be complicit at the end. I don't mean that you can involve in every situation because sometimes you might endanger your life, but don't say it's not my business. Everything that's happening around you is your business. And this is why when I talk to students, I tell them the same thing. They say, voting, why vote? All the politicians are crooks. And I said, if you're not voting, you can't complain. If you're not voting, you can't complain. If you vote, you have a voice. And that one voice might sometimes make the difference. Because if you voted, the person you didn't vote for maybe won because you didn't vote. This is my message to the young and to the old.
I like it.
It's a good message.
Moshe, that's all of our questions, so as long as Ryan got as many pictures as he needs.
I got lots.
You did?
You're not going to put in everything I said,
Just a little bit, I just like to.
Unless you have anything in particular you want me to take a photo of.
Pardon?
So unless you have anything in particular you want me to take a photo of, like old photos.
Do you
of
want to get a
holding
picture with
or-
you and Malka? A picture of
Yeah,
you holding her
that would,
photograph? That's her right there.
Perfect.
The 7th of May was Malka's 8th anniversary of her passing.
Perfect. What, put that back for you?
You tell his time Malka being an educator.
Yeah.
We are in New York, it's after a day's work, we are having supper. And by the way, she gave every mother her telephone number at home. If you have a problem, call me. So the telephone rings, I pick it up, and I said, Malka, so-and-so is calling, should she call you back? you'll call her back later? He says, no. Sapa can wait, she says. She needs me now. You understand? That was Mark.
Alright, folks, I think we're good.
Perfect.
Thank you, Moshe.
Thank you.